My millionaire parents refused me $30K for life-saving surgeries because they had no money, but they invested $500,000 in my husband's cheating ex-wife. And when I confronted them, they called my medical bills money down the drain. I'm 34 years old. I'm an elementary school teacher. And about 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness that basically forced me to undergo several surgeries and take unpaid leave from my job because, you know, I couldn't stand in front of a classroom when I could barely walk without feeling like I was going to pass out. Stephen, my husband, was amazing through all of that, working overtime as a construction project manager to cover what he could. But the truth is that medical bills piled up so fast that we were drowning in debt before we could even blink. And the worst part wasn't the illness itself, or even the debts that seemed to multiply every time we opened the mailbox, but discovering that my parents, who literally own several successful businesses and live in a house worth more than what I'm going to earn in my entire life, decided it was better to invest almost $500,000 in my husband's cheating ex-wife than to help their own daughter pay her medical bills. But let me start from the beginning, because this story is so twisted that I wouldn't even believe it myself if it hadn't happened to me. I grew up in what I guess you could call a privileged family. I mean, we weren't millionaires like yachts and private jets type, but my parents have money. That's undeniable. My dad built his business from scratch, and my mom has her own consulting firm, and between the two of them, they always managed to give my younger sister and me a comfortable life. Family trips, private universities, that kind of thing. We weren't emotionally close, let's say. My parents were always more the type who show love through checks and expensive gifts than through deep conversations or hugs. But I thought that at the end of the day, if I ever really needed them, they would be there for me. Spoiler alert, they weren't. I met Stephen about 6 years ago at a mutual friends gathering, and from the first moment there was something between us that just worked. You know, that feeling when you meet someone who really gets you. We got married after 2 years of dating, and everything was perfect, until my health started deteriorating. The symptoms started subtly: extreme fatigue that I attributed to work stress, pains that I thought were normal, but then they got so bad that I had to go to the doctor. And after months of tests and specialists, I was diagnosed with this chronic illness that required immediate surgery and long-term treatment that my insurance barely covered. The first surgery was in February 2 years ago, I think, or maybe it was late January. I don't remember exactly. But what I do remember perfectly is sitting down with Stephen to look at our finances and realizing that even with his health insurance, we were going to have to pay out of pocket like $30,000 just for the first procedure, not counting medications, therapies, and the fact that I wasn't going to be able to work for months. So I did what I thought any daughter would do. I called my parents. I explained the situation, told them I needed help, that Stephen was doing everything he could, but it just wasn't enough. And you know what they told me? That things were tough for them too, that they had a lot of expenses, that they had just invested in some new project, and money was tight. They offered me $500. $500. When my mom had literally just bought a new car that cost over $60,000. I couldn't believe it, but I also didn't want to pressure them because, well, it's their money and I guess they have the right to do what they want with it. Although I'm not going to lie, it hurt so much that my own mother told me she couldn't help me when I knew perfectly well they could. So I did what I had to do. I underwent the surgery. I recovered as fast as I could and got a part-time job doing private tutoring while still on leave from school because we desperately needed the money. Stephen worked like 12 hours a day. I taught private classes in the evenings and weekends even though my body was screaming at me to rest. And somehow we managed to stay afloat, paying off the debts little by little, living with the bare minimum, sacrificing everything that wasn't absolutely essential. It was the hardest year of my life. Honestly, not just because of the physical pain from the illness and the follow-up surgeries I needed, but because of the constant feeling that we were one step away from complete financial collapse, and my parents just went on with their lives like nothing was happening, posting photos on social media of their fancy dinners and their trips while I was counting pennies to buy food. Fast forward, like a year and a half after all that, things were starting to improve a little. I had gone back to work at the school, although I still needed expensive medications and frequent medical appointments, and Stephen had just finished a big project that gave him a decent bonus. We were at a family dinner at my parents' house, something we did every couple of months or so because, despite everything, I was still trying to maintain the relationship. When my sister, who's like 29 years old and has always been a bit careless with words, casually dropped something that changed everything. We were talking about, I don't know what, entrepreneurship or businesses or something like that, and she casually mentioned that Michelle, Steven's ex-wife, had just opened her second yoga studio thanks to the support of my parents as angel investors. I swear the world stopped in that moment. I looked at my sister, then at Steven, who had gone pale, and then at my parents, who were suddenly very interested in their plates. Michelle, so you understand the full context, was Steven's first wife. They were married for like 5 years and she cheated on him multiple times. Literally, she cheated with at least 3 different guys that Steven discovered, and the divorce was an emotional disaster for him when Steven and I started dating. He was still healing from all that betrayal, and my parents knew that perfectly well. They knew the whole story because I told them. Because I thought it was important for them to understand why Steven sometimes had trust issues, and why that previous marriage had been so toxic for him. I asked my sister to repeat what she had just said, and she, realizing she had screwed up, got nervous and tried to change the subject. But it was too late. I looked directly at my father and asked him if it was true, if they had really been funding Michelle's businesses, and after an uncomfortable silence that lasted forever, my mother was the one who spoke. She said, "Yes, we've been helping Michelle with her entrepreneurship. She's a very talented girl with a lot of potential, and we believed it was a good investment." A good investment. Those were her exact words. I asked them how much money exactly they had invested, and my father muttered something about how that wasn't my business, that it was their private finances, and I literally exploded. I reminded them, with my voice shaking with rage, that a year and a half ago, when I desperately needed help to pay for my surgeries, they told me they didn't have available money, that things were tough, and now it turned out they had enough money to invest in the business of the woman who destroyed my husband's first marriage. My mom had the nerve to say it was different, that Michelle needed an opportunity, that she had changed a lot and was building something beautiful with her life, and that besides, a business investment has potential for return while medical bills are basically money down the drain. Money down the drain? That's what my own mother called the expenses that saved my life. Stephen tried to intervene, telling them they were being completely irrational, but my father interrupted him and told him he had no right to have an opinion about how they used their money, and that maybe if I had considered healthier options, like yoga and meditation, instead of depending so much on traditional medicine, I wouldn't be in this situation. I mean, basically he was telling me that my chronic illness, diagnosed by multiple specialists, could have been avoided with yoga, the same yoga that his new protege taught. The irony was so grotesque that I almost laughed, but I was too furious and hurt to find the humor in it. I demanded that they leave my house, because it turns out the dinner was at my house, not theirs. As I mentioned before, he got confused about the place, but whatever. And my mother called me melodramatic, said I was blowing things out of proportion and that I should be grateful that they at least gave me something when I had surgery. I literally kicked them out screaming, with Stephen holding me because I was shaking from head to toe, and that was the last time I spoke to them directly for months. My sister stayed with me that night, crying and apologizing for accidentally revealing everything, but I told her it wasn't her fault, that I needed to know the truth even though it hurt so much I felt like I couldn't breathe. What happened next was even more surreal. Like 2 days after that disastrous dinner, I get a message from Michelle, from the same Michelle who ruined my husband's first marriage, telling me she had heard about our difficult situation and that if I ever needed to relax or work on my holistic health, she would be happy to offer me free classes at her studio. The audacity of this woman. I literally stared at the message for like 10 minutes, unable to process that this was real. I showed Stephen the message and he couldn't believe it either, and we decided to just block her because we didn't have the emotional energy to deal with that level of hypocrisy. But things kept getting worse. My aunt, my mom's sister, who I always had a good relationship with, called me a week after all the drama and told me things that honestly destroyed me. It turns out my parents hadn't just invested in Michelle's business, but had practically adopted her as their replacement daughter. They had spent the last 3 Thanksgivings with her, had gone on beach vacations together, celebrated her birthday with fancy dinners, and my mother even went with her to pick out the location for her second yoga studio. My aunt told me all this crying, saying she had tried to talk to my mom multiple times about how inappropriate everything was, but my mother insisted that Michelle was like the daughter she always wanted, someone who really appreciated her advice and support. Not like me, who, according to her, had always been distant and ungrateful. Can you believe it? My own mother saying that Michelle, the woman who repeatedly cheated on my husband and almost destroyed him emotionally, was a better daughter than me. And the worst part is that while my aunt was telling me all this, I started remembering small details that I hadn't processed before, like the times my parents canceled plans, with me at the last minute with vague excuses, or when my mom casually mentioned she had discovered a new organic food place without saying who she went with, or the photos on social media where only the two of them appeared, but the comments mentioned what a nice afternoon. Clearly, there was a third person taking the photos. Everything suddenly fit into this horrible picture that my parents had been living a parallel life with Michelle while treating me like a bothersome obligation. Stephen was so furious that he wanted to confront my parents himself, but I asked him not to because I knew it would only make things worse. Instead, I decided to simply cut contact, not call them, not answer their messages, nothing. I blocked my mother from social media when she started posting inspirational quotes about forgiveness and family, as if I were the one who needed to forgive something. My sister also started distancing herself from them after realizing the magnitude of what they had done, and that caused more family drama, because now my parents blamed Stephen and me for alienating our sister from them. Things got really weird when Michelle and my parents showed up unannounced at my work, at the school where I teach. It was like 6 months ago. They arrived during my lunch hour and demanded to speak with me. But the principal, who knew part of the situation because I had had to explain my medical absences, didn't let them in and called security. My parents made a scene, yelling that they just wanted to see their daughter, that I was being irrational, and Michelle was standing there with a victim face as if she were the affected one in all of this. Security escorted them out of the building, and I spent the rest of the day shaking in my classroom, terrified they would come back or do something worse. And yes, they did something worse. Like a week later, Michelle tried to enter my house using the security code that, guess what? My parents had given her without my knowledge. We have security cameras that we installed after we got robbed years ago, so everything was recorded. Michelle trying to open the front door, getting nervous when the alarm started going off, and then fleeing when she realized there were cameras. Stephen filed a police report with the video, but since technically she had the code, even though she obtained it illegally from my parents, they couldn't do much except document the incident. That's when my sister, bless her, started investigating because she was as outraged as we were, and what she discovered was worse than we imagined. It turns out my parents didn't just invest in Michelle's businesses, but basically financed her entire life for the last 3 years. The total was close to $500,000. I'm not exaggerating. $500,000 that included the initial investment for the first yoga studio, then the second studio, mortgage payments on her house for 2 years while she established the business, a new car, and even a fund, so she could take meditation retreats in Bali and India to perfect her craft. Meanwhile, I was working 2 jobs while recovering from surgeries because my parents couldn't give me more than $500 to save my life. My sister confronted my parents with all this information, and they didn't deny it, but they didn't show any kind of remorse either. My father said something about how they had seen potential in Michelle and wanted to help her achieve her dreams, and my mother added that Michelle had always been so sweet and grateful to them, unlike me, who apparently only looked for them when I needed something. That conversation ended with my sister telling them they were the worst parents in the world and that she didn't want to see them again, and since then she and her husband have also cut complete contact with them. But my parents didn't give up so easily. They started spreading rumors in their social circle that I was mentally unstable, that I was making up dramatic stories because I was jealous of Michelle's success, and that Michelle had been so generous offering to help the family in difficult times, but I had rejected her out of bitterness. Some distant relatives and friends of my parents started calling me or sending me messages, asking what was going on, if it was true I was having a nervous breakdown. And I had to block more people than I can count, because I didn't have the energy to explain the truth to each one. Things reached a critical point like 3 months ago when my parents literally camped outside my house. Stephen arrived from work and found them sitting in their car in our driveway, just watching the house. He called the police immediately, and they came and told them to leave or face harassment charges, and my parents finally left, but not before my mother yelled from the car that someday I would regret pushing my family away. That Michelle had been more of a daughter to them than I ever was, and that when I wanted to come crawling back asking for money, they wouldn't be there. I consulted with a lawyer about the possibility of a restraining order, and he told me we could probably get a temporary one given the circumstances, Michelle's attempt to enter my house, the harassment at my work, the stalking on our property. We changed all the security codes, the locks. We even considered moving, but we just didn't have the money to do it at that time. My sister also had to take similar measures because my parents started harassing her too, showing up at her work, calling her husband to try to convince him to force her to reconcile with them. The most recent drama was like a month ago, when my parents started spreading new rumors that Stephen was taking advantage of me financially, that he had manipulated me into alienating myself from my family to have total control over me and over any future inheritance I might receive. It's so absurd, it would be funny if it weren't so hurtful, because Stephen has been the only person who has been by my side unconditionally through all of this, working himself to exhaustion to make sure we had what we needed, taking me to all my medical appointments, holding me when I cried from frustration and pain, both physical and emotional. I had to quit my tutoring job on my doctor's advice because the stress from all this was affecting my health, worsening my symptoms, and he told me very clearly that if I didn't reduce my workload and stress levels, I was going to end up needing another surgery much sooner than expected. Stephen received a promotion like 3 weeks ago, thank God, with a significant raise and better health insurance that covers more of my treatments. So financially, we're in a much better place than 2 years ago, but emotionally, I'm still a mess. And now here we are. Stephen and I decided that next month we're going to move to another neighborhood, start fresh in a place where my parents don't know where we live, and we both started therapy because all this affected us more than we wanted to admit. My sister and I talk almost every day. She's in her own healing process from all this, and we support each other as best we can. My parents continue with Michelle, I suppose, living their fantasy of a perfect family with their replacement daughter, who tells them how wonderful they are while they spend money on her business dreams. Last week, my aunt sent me a message saying my parents asked her if I had gotten over my dramatic phase yet, as if everything that happened was just a temporary tantrum on my part. I didn't respond. There's nothing to say. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive them for choosing my husband's cheating ex-wife over their own daughter when I needed them most, for lying to me about not having money while pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into someone who wasn't family, for treating me like I was the problem, when all I did was expect them to support me in the most difficult moment of my life. That's it, I guess.